All right. Hello. This is my self-reflection on the first conducting exam involving the Star Spangled Banner and the EFT exercise. So the first thing I did was the Star Spangled Banner. I think so. Right off the bat, for me, one of the things I noticed was just my mental preparation going into getting ready to conduct. And while I may not always have that, I feel it's good for me right now to at least associate getting on the podium with uh, um, getting in the mindset to listen, to conduct, and to uh, you know fully commit myself to the music. So the first thing I noticed was how awkward my left arm is. There's not really something that it's doing. It seems to mostly be at either an awkward position or trying to determine dynamics. Especially in this first section, it seems a little more awkward than it does throughout the piece or even in the AFT exercise. I feel like being more aware of the my left arm and knowing what I'm doing and being more, I guess, being more intentional with it would be something for me to look out for in the future, because it just looks a little awkward. And to me, if I was a musician playing while I was watching myself conduct, I would sort of be a little off put musically by the conductor's left hand if it's not, being either if it's not being used properly or if it's just sort of in the middle somewhere where it's not supposed to be. Um, I also noticed that my beat pattern is although it's pretty good, it's still rather like it's wider than I intended it to be, and it doesn't match the sound that I had intended for it in my head. So that's also another thing for me to look out for, because I know I was focused a little too much on getting the arches right, but I feel like it came off a little too wide, more wide than I intended, more broad than I intended it to be. So on to the next section. So in this next section, I believe this also applies to the first section, my wrist gets a little stiff when I have my baton in my hand and I'm conducting a quiet section. It gets a little stiff and it comes off as very tense. And musically, I can even like hear it as a little like stiff and tense. Um, and that's not at all what I wanted, even though it is possible in music. It's not something that I wanted in the moment. So that's something another thing for me to look out for. Definitely watch myself practice the smaller use of space and not, losing that wrist motion. I feel like it just really disappeared as I got quieter. Um, and I do like my facial expressions in this section, but I feel like it can be a little more intentional. It's not really clear what I want. I think it's able to get a general idea, but it's not like something that really represents the score of what I wanted and the sound that I wanted. So I feel like I can take time to experiment with that and really nail that down. So another thing I noticed was my left arm again seems to be moving a little too much. It's moving sort of down, then out, then back down, and it seems more unnecessary, and that seems to be a consistent habit of mine. So I think more awareness, again, it comes back to more awareness. My left hand, more awareness of like what I'm doing with it and trying to like hone it in, experimenting with like um, triangle exercises, Sagittarial plane, really making intentional use of the left hand as opposed just to dynamics and making sure that movement is very, very clear, not real kind of like move, pause, move, or move, then moves outwards and moving back down to, you know, um, indicate something. It needs to have more intent and more clearness to it. So there, the pick up into the last measure, the last couple measures seems it was a little too big. I didn't want it to be that big. I wanted it to be a little more subtle, but still noticeable to the ensemble. But I made it a little too big, and that's something I would need to work on. The release and then prep into the next beat, because I feel like not just in this particular instance that it wasn't as clear as it could have been, and it wasn't. There could have been a little more musical intent that had gone along with it. So overall, a lot of the struggles seem to be like focusing on really honing in on the intentional use of my left hand, as well as like being more intentional with the beat pattern as well. I feel like it was very clear. However, there was really it really stayed sort of bland and the same, and there wasn't really anything to do. There was no really any musicality within what I was trying to conduct, and I feel as though it came off um, in the sound that the ensemble was producing, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted. It was, it got the general points, but it wasn't, there wasn't like the detailedness of that good musicality really requires. There wasn't really much shape. There wasn't really much. There was good contrast within the ensemble, and I was able to get that. But it still was. I think overall there's still a good amount of improvement that can be made, but I am happy with like things such as like getting the arches down, the beat pattern staying consistent with the time, getting general ideas across. Now it's time to get more specific and hone in on specific qualities of musicality, specific like articulation, specific releases, specific preps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so the next um, thing would be the EFT exercise. So let me on that. Okay. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I feel as though, and this was also an issue in the Stressman banner, but I feel as though here especially, I was able to notice that I wasn't looking at the ensemble. I had a tendency to look a little above the ensemble, but that's not where I should be looking because the ensemble is not up there. It's down there, and my focus should be on the ensemble. Yeah. I feel like especially in this section, there's a little more flick and I wanted a little more flick upwards. And I feel like it was a little more accentuated than I wanted, especially in this section. And I feel I can see it in my conducting that I am accenting and flicking in a way that I didn't intend to. Although the beat stayed consistent and I got the time and the tempo that I wanted to, I feel like the sound still wasn't entirely there, and I was trying to bring. I can see my baton going, flicking upwards more than I intended for it to.
One and two and one and two and three and four and one and two and three and four and two and three and four and one and two and
I feel like throughout that particular section, even a little bit of the beginning too, I my focus was not entirely on the ensemble. It was more towards trying to get it right. I was focused on trying to get everything right as opposed to like the music itself. And um, I was able to get some points that I needed to across, but I feel as though the music itself, the EFT, even though it's just an exercise, was not um, like it did not achieve the greatest musical purpose that it had for that particular exercise.
three and four and one and two and three and four and one and two and three and four and one and two and three and four and one.
So overall, I feel as though some of my biggest weak points from both Stars Finger Banner and the EFT exercise involve me not having good intentional use of the left hand. It seems to be very uncomfortable, still very uncomfortable, and that's something I need to get comfortable with through constant use of like triangle exercise, trying to incorporate things like that, even if it may seem unnecessary in my own private practice, just incorporate things like that, just to get comfortable with the idea of doing that while conducting so that I have more intentional use of my left hand. I feel like I practice the use of space with my beat patterns, making sure my wrist stays loose, making sure everything in my body is still loose and there is no tension. And I think most of all, I think the biggest problem would be the me not paying attention to the sound I'm getting through my conducting. I feel there should be more of a focus on that. And after all, it's music, and focus should be on the sound as opposed to like getting every beat perfect, getting every following the music down to a T. You gotta focus on the sound, the intent of the composer, whatever it may be. You gotta focus on what's happening through the ensemble as opposed to just keeping time, waving a baton. It's gotta. I feel like I need to constantly listen to what's going on, and practice like taking time to like get um, listening while also getting used to um, the different beat patterns and shapes. I feel like um, on a on the positive side, my beat patterns were good, angles were good, arches were good. Everything felt very comfortable. But I feel like honing that in, getting so comfortable that I'm able to do that, focus on the music as well as a bunch of other things without having to focus on one thing. Then I'd be able to like move on to the next step of learning how to conduct. But overall, I feel as though it's a pretty good test, and I have a lot of things that I can work on and continue to practice in order to prepare for the next unit of the